legendary Adrian Chenault, son of Tom Chenault. Tom Chenault is his father, and so he is going to talk to us today about something interesting, in addition to his story, and that's contact mapping and the power of maintaining high quality relationships. So, yeah, I actually just got to know Adrian a very little amount the other week, right? So I was on a live with Todd Falcone. Some of you saw it, who are either going to pop on or you're going to watch the replay. And Todd Falcone introduced me to Adrian because I was asking, Todd about how he keeps track of conversations. And he, of course, I think he uses notes in his phone or something like this. And then, he introduced me, and I actually didn't even know why he was introducing you to me, Adrian. I was like, yeah, okay, all right. So Adrian actually has a company that he runs with his dad that helps people do contact mapping and keep track in a really powerful way of authentic conversations, relationship building, and sales conversations. So, I talked to him for a few minutes. I was like, hey, man, I'd love to pull you out and just kind of pick your brain about your story and about how this came to be, and also, how this helps people. And I think that anybody watching this, whether or not you end up using their solution for contact mapping, they can, I think, just go to contactmapping.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think contact mapping as well, you can download from the App Store. They have a free version, and then they have an upgraded version. I downloaded it the other week. I still have yet to use it, so maybe he'll convince me today. But this is especially for people like me that maybe aren't so organized around details like this. And so, in any case, Adrian, I want to really pick your brain about this today, because I think this is something so valuable that I've done at certain points in my life, and other points in my life I've maybe not done as well. But talk to me about your story, and then how that came to be, and then we'll weave it all the way from there into how you got into this whole contact mapping thing that you're doing right now.
Awesome. Yeah. First, thanks for having me. It's kind of fun just the way that things weave together. And so, David, we were trying to figure it out. Like, I don't know when we became connected on Facebook, but I was, headed home, wrapping up work. I opened up my Facebook and up popped Todd, who is a good friend of both of ours, and somebody who you never know what's going to come out of his mouth. And so I popped onto that broadcast and just thought it was an awesome conversation and fun to kind of see how that all came about. And so thanks for having me, first of all. Just to share a little bit of the background story, I grew up, as David mentioned, my dad has been in network marketing for 30-ish years. My dad's been sober for 34 years, which was part of his impetus to ultimately get into network marketing and out of some other things that he was doing prior to that. And so really, as long as I can remember, my dad was in network marketing, and my parents divorced when I was a pretty young kid. And so half of my life, half of my time as a kid, I'm at dad's house. He always was, an early adopter of a cell phone and all this stuff. So, my dad's just been, I feel like, on the phone for most of his life. And I was watching and observing him do what he did, working from home and going to meetings and all this kind of stuff. And, the thing that really stood out to me from a very young age is just my dad he just had this way with people. He had a way with people, whether it was, people who were early in sobriety, people who were in really, really rough shape, all that sort of end of the spectrum, all the way through to people who were, extremely powerful, extremely successful, and people that he was, looking to get around early on in his career, and then ultimately became, their peers himself. And so I've just had this front row seat to watching the way that my dad was around people and the value that he put on that. And in ways that I don't think I understood until much later as an adult, that really imprinted on me and got into my own DNA and became meaningful to me as well.
Right. Okay. So you got, I think this is a unique perspective as well, just because you come from a background of network marketing, but you've never really done it. Your dad did network marketing around you. So you saw your dad build big organizations. His dad, if you don't know him, Tom Chenault, he's legendary. And so you saw the way that your dad connected, the way that your dad built relationships, the way that he nurtured people and things like this. And talk about how that led to, just talk about how you developed in your own career. And then let's bring it back around to kind of what you're doing now and how people can use strategies from it to improve their own relationships?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really observed with my dad is he was always so good about just being being with people, being in front of people. And I think in particular, one of the things that stands out to me that I don't think that I just kind of took to be sort of normal at the time, and I have come to since realize that it's not, is that he really poured into and gave value and showed consistent appreciation to the leaders that he was working with in his organizations that he built. And so, literally every day he continues to this day, right? He's talking to the people that make his business go literally every single day. And most of the time that is, just asking them how he can help, asking them, what he can do to contribute into their lives. But I just watched him do that. And it really, I now having been on the other side, I know how often it can be and how easy it can be to fall into the trap of just, you're chasing, you're out there, you're recruiting, you're doing this thing, and then people join and you don't like intentionally drop them, but you're focused on doing this outside in thing, and it's easy to sort of forget about the people that are on the inside, or to not pay close enough attention and to not pour into them enough. And my dad's always been super good at that. And he really pushed me to do those, to do those same things in my own way. Again, kind of without me realizing it. Like he was always really good about, encouraging me to seek out mentors. He was always really good about encouraging me to build relationships and took me into conversations with really high powered people and these sort of things. And I think gave me a comfort level with that. And so, my dad, for those of you who maybe don't know him, like I said, he's 34 years sober, but he's like just this crazy sort of larger than life kind of a guy. Another guy kind of like Todd that you want to hang out with because you don't know what's going to come out of his mouth next or what ridiculous thing he might do. And I'm not, I have come to find I'm maybe a little bit more like that than I thought before, but I'm the oldest kid. I like studied really hard. Like I'm like the stay in the box guy. And so I always sort of like observe my dad as like, all right, like you're cool. And like you do, like this works great for you, but like that is not for me. And so my dad got out of high school. I think he made it like one semester in college and then started drinking and just like totally like he's that side of the spectrum. And I was like, I studied, I got a 4.0 in college almost. Like I was like on it, man. So I was like the opposite end of the spectrum. And I was like, you're awesome. And I love you. And I have always greatly admired my dad, but I was like, I'm not going into the family business. Like we're not the same. And so I went off to, I had studied finance and math in college. I like studied super hard. I got a finance job out of college. I went and worked as an investment analyst for a few years. And what was interesting is during that time, I hated this job. It was so boring. I thought I like had landed the dream job, and it was just this like terrible, like sit in a cubicle and read 10K reports, like SEC filings all day long. Like it was,
you're talking to someone who thinks that every job is boring. So,
so even as jobs go, this one was extra boring.
Huh?
Yeah, this one was worse than most. And so I started during that time, I was like, well, I'm like, I literally sit in a cubicle all day. Like I have to do something to like keep me from jumping off a bridge. And so I literally would book a lunch. I had 5 days a week. I would go out to lunch with somebody just to like have a conversation because I was so isolated in this job. And I started building relationships and I was like, oh, this is cool. And I started like realizing that was fun. And I ended up, so I spent 3 years there and I was like, I got to get out of here. Like, I don't want to be like, I felt like I was on the outside of a building, like peering through the windows, looking in and like not building anything. And so I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And so I ended up going to a tech company called Rackspace, and I spent 7 years working with those guys, and it was awesome. And what ended up happening was, again, I just had this instinctive belief that like as a finance person, like you're supposed to be partnering with the business and helping them to get the resources that they need and understand what they want and this whole thing. And my peers were like crunching numbers and hiding behind the spreadsheet and never talking to anybody. And that just didn't make any sense to me. And so I started, the company that I worked for, they were famous because they bought a defunct shopping mall and converted it into their corporate campus. And so it was a 1 million square foot building on 2 floors, which meant it was like 2 miles from this side of it to this side of it. And finance was over here and sales was over here. And so like my people in my department would like email the people that were physically in the building, even though, you know, understandably they were far away, but like they were like not building any relationships. And I just saw it as the other way around. And so I started going over there and connecting and building relationships. And as a result of that, I started getting accolades. And those accolades led to getting to move around the world working for this company. I got to move to England and then Australia and then eventually Switzerland working for this company. And at a pretty young age, I ended up running all of the finance group for this organization for everything outside the United States, which was a really big job. And it was kind of at that time that I had this realization like, wow, none of this would have happened if it wasn't for relationships. Like that idea started to crystallize. And towards the end of that, the company that I was working for ended up getting taken over by Apollo Group, which is a private equity firm, which I do not recommend getting taken over by a private equity firm for any of you that have ever considered such a thing. It is not much fun. And so the company gets taken over. And the bad part was that really, really sucked. The good part was that it kind of freed me up to go, okay, well, you know, if I'm ever going to go and do something different, that now's the time to do it. And I had been sort of ridden hard and put away wet. I really was burned out. And that was around the time back in 2016, 2017 timeframe when we sort of had this epiphany, my dad and I, that we had sort of taken parallel paths in very different worlds of building relationships to create success in our lives. And that was when this idea of taking and building a company around that concept was born.
Right. So what's interesting about this to me is that, you know, from listening to your story, so you were around network marketing like all your life. You didn't jive with it in the sense that like you wanted to do it. You wanted to do something that was more the traditional route. And then you went into the traditional business world. And then you just kind of took off and succeeded like this by taking the skills that you learned from your dad on building relationships and then applying them in a different context. And it basically caused you to go to the top in that context really quick. Am I understanding the story right?
That's exactly right.
Right. So this way that you learned of building relationships, this is actually, you know, this is related obviously to the software you guys are building now. And so I'm interested in this because we were just talking the other week to Todd Falcone about it. And obviously he does something similar to this. And that's why he introduced me to you, because he said he's kind of stuck in his ways with the way that he does it. But then you guys actually have a system where you help people to maintain relationships. And just from my own experience, this is something that is just clunky and unbelievably difficult. And almost everybody is disorganized around. So talk to me about first of all, talk to me about like what kind of things you learned from your dad that led to this whole contact mapping idea that you guys are doing now. Like, and what was it that you were doing that allowed you to kind of rise to the top of the corporate job that you were working in as well?
Yeah. So I think the first job I ever had, like as a really young kid, like, you know, child labor laws young, was, you know, my dad was this very early adopter of like the early CRM technology, like Act and Goldmine and some of these things that came out a super long time ago. And so like one of my first jobs, I was always really good at typing. I had an AOL account when I was like really little, and that was like, girls wouldn't talk to me in real life, but girls that were probably really 50-year-old men, but that's another story. You know, you could like talk to people. So I was like in the chat rooms, like I was really good at typing. And so he was like, all right, I'm going to hire you to do data entry. And so I like literally converted his like old school physical Rolodex into Act and like typed all these contacts in. And so for forever, my dad, like he understood the value of keeping notes on people, and he did it for years and years. He actually learned it in the restaurant business originally. And then that turned into the stock brokerage business and eventually into network marketing. And so I like helped him to do that. And I think that was, you know, that was instructive to me, seeing him do that. But what he would do later, like kind of in the interim period, once smartphones came out, is he would like put all these crazy notes. Like he'd be like, okay, I met David at like, you know, such and such event, like so he'd like have this big long thing in the note field of the contact. And it was like a mess. Like there had all this like crap in there, but like that was how he would keep his notes. And so he would like bump into somebody and they'd be like, hey, nice to meet you. And he'd be like, nope, we met in, January of 2005 at this event or whatever. And he'd like remember things about people. And he was just really good at doing that. And it was really valuable. I saw it be really valuable to him because he was this guy that like could put deals together. Like that was one of the things that he continues to do this day, but that has been like remarkable about my dad is like, he does the network marketing thing, but then like somebody will be like, I need to like sell this like weird asset, or I need somebody to like help me do this or whatever. And he'll like put a deal together and like find a way to like get a commission off of it or whatever. Like he's amazing at like leveraging his network to be able to create value for others. And he has no hesitation being like, dude, like I just, made everybody win, like hook me up here. And so he's done that over and over again.
Right.
And so, when I got into the corporate world, I just had, I remember like this, one of the moments that was really key was I worked with the sales organization, I was so lucky that they placed me with the sales organization because sales organizations get a lot of attention and a lot of resources in most corporate organizations. And so I got paired with these guys and there was this whole thing. It was a corporate company and it was like, hey, there's like, on a monthly basis, there's $100,000 in contracts that get signed. And the reality is that like only 92% of that materializes into revenue. It's like, okay. And I was like, well, what happens to the other 8%? And they were like, we don't know. And I was like, well, that's weird. Like you have to know. And they're like, no, we don't know.
What percentage of contracts got signed that you said?
Like 92%. So like 100,000 gets booked and 92,000 would end up as revenue. So there was this gap between the two things, which like that's a lot of that adds up a lot over time, right? Because these are recurring revenue contracts. And so I was like, why doesn't that happen? And they're like, we don't know. And I was like, well, why don't you know? And they go, oh, well, because basically it's an unknowable thing. And I was like, this is bullshit. Like, how is it unknowable? And so I went and I started talking to sales and to like data intelligence and all these people. And like, everyone wanted to solve it, but like essentially it was like no one was willing to freaking talk to each other was what it ultimately came down to. And it was hard. Like don't get me wrong, like it was a really hard problem. That's why no one had solved it. But like the reason that it hadn't been solved is because no one was like able to get all the egos and all the people to come together enough to solve this problem. And I ended up not being the person to solve the problem, but being the instigator of getting the people together and staying with this long enough that like, we didn't solve it 100%, but we'd reduced that 92% became like 98%, which was a big deal. And so this was where, huge, hundreds of thousands, probably multiple millions of dollars in value of the stock of that company happened as a result of figuring this stuff out. And so it just, again, became this thing of like, wow, like I went out and how I did that was like, at first, the guy that was like the sales ops person almost had a vested interest in not solving the problem because he'd already told somebody it couldn't be solved. And so if I can solve it, like that's going to not look good for him. And so it started with trust, right? Like hey dude, like I'm not going to run you under the bus here. Like we're going to figure this out together. And I'm not just going to like take the credit or whatever. Like, let's see if we can figure this out. And who are you and what's your story and whatever. And that just kept happening over and over again. And then meanwhile, like, I just felt like I kind of kept being in the right place at the right time over and over again in this company. But looking back on it, it was because of these things that those opportunities opened.
Well, it's the relationships. When you have enough relationships that are quality, there's always opportunity, right? Yeah, I'm teaching this all the time. So this is something that I repeat all the time is that like when you have the relationships, when you're connected with the right people and you're connected enough to them,
yes,
you never are going to run out of opportunity. It's impossible because there's opportunity everywhere and it's in the people. Right.
And I love what you just said. Huh? I love what you just said. And I'd love you to maybe even expand on it a little bit of like, it isn't like, these are not trading cards, right? Like LinkedIn connections or Facebook friends or whatever does not mean jack. It's the level of connection. Like there's a requisite basic level of connection before it means anything. But then there's also like levels of continuing depth where you unlock things that the rest of the world might not even know was possible. Has that been true in your experience?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that I'm not good at keeping track of things necessarily, which is, we're going to get into that as well. Naturally, I'm not like that. So I have to have some sort of a system, obviously, that I follow for the relationships. But what I find is that when you really are connected to people, that you get invited everywhere, that you get invited into things that other people don't get invited into. You're given special opportunities that nobody else has, and that you're the first to hear of opportunities before everyone else hears of them. So that's what I find personally, right? So yeah, that would be my expansion. What would be your expansion on that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and you have to. It's almost like I remember again, kind of as I was experiencing this, being like, I feel like I'm like in this secret club that like no one else knows exists. And like at the time I was like, I hadn't really, partly I was like, pinching myself. Like, I don't want the spell to like go away. So like, I'm not going to ask too many questions about this, but like I did, like we moved to England, and it was like, okay, like I'm going to move to England for probably 2 or 3 years and then come back. And that was going to be the end of it. And then I got to England and they're like, hey, do you want to go to Australia? And I was like, what? But like, it just kept happening. And I think it was that function of a combination of relationships, and like, you have to follow through, right? You have to make them look good. You have to earn the next opportunity. But if you're doing that, like, these things can kind of stack, and it's almost hard to describe like the level of momentum or the level of like what can happen if you haven't experienced it before. But having now experienced it for sure at least once, and maybe a couple of times in different ways, it's like it's this magical, intoxicating kind of an experience to have that exists inside of creating relationships like that.
Well, so you mentioned a few things that we were going through kind of your story here. One of the things you mentioned is when you were working for a corporation, you were bored and you started booking lunch appointments 5 days a week, right? Is what you mentioned. Now, were you meeting with different people every single day, like all through the year? Or was it the same people over and over and over again that you were meeting?
I would say it was a combination of the two, right? So it was probably like a quarter of those or so were sort of like, I would reach out to people like once a month or so to get together with them. And then a lot of them were this connection would lead to that connection or whatever. And it would just sort of build on itself. And I would meet new people as a result of introductions coming from friends who I was already meeting.
Yeah. So before you know it, you have deeper relationships, like on a wider scale and a deeper scale than anybody else in your company. Of course, they're going to put you at the top.
Yeah.
That makes tons of sense to me. Right.
Yeah.
So what are some elements and one of the other things I noticed about you just in talking to you that I think it's good for everybody watching to pay attention to certain things, because Adrian he's a fantastic relationship builder, is how you talk about your dad, right? Like, there's very few people that you get on a conversation and they talk about their dad so it's such a positive, affirming way, right? Are you like this with all of your relationships? Like when are you always edifying people and things like this wherever you go? Because I noticed this about you actually the very first time I talked to you. I noticed that you did.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think so. I think that I think I have a natural tendency to want to see the good in people, and edification, I think is one of the most powerful skills that you can learn. And I think even more importantly is learning to use edification, speaking well of others in a way that is not contrived and where you really are saying what you mean about that person. And so I really work on that to look to identify those things in other people. I wrote something about this the other day, and it's like one of my dad's truisms that I remember a ton. And I remember him doing this really well with me as a kid, is like, your tendency as a parent, especially, is like to catch your kid doing things wrong, right? Like there's all this evidence of things that your child maybe doesn't do well, or that they're falling short of what you ask them to do, and you catch them doing things wrong in terms of like giving them feedback, like, hey, like I told you to go put the plate in the dishwasher and it's in the sink. Like that's not what I said. Put it in the dishwasher or whatever. And my dad had this sort of saying of like, you need to learn how to catch people doing things right. And I think much like gratitude, they talk about how if you start to be if you cultivate your sense of gratitude, like you'll find way more to be grateful for, and it will like become this self-reinforcing mechanism. I think the same is true in relationships, that if I learn to be looking for the things that I appreciate and admire about people, I will see those things more readily, and I'll be more satisfied in that relationship, and that relationship will grow stronger as a result. And so I've experienced that, and at this point it's almost kind of unconscious, but I think it is something that's really worth cultivating or teaching yourself how to do if that doesn't come natural.
Right. So notice the positive in others, rather than trying to dig out like what's wrong with them or what they're not doing right. You instead look for what they are doing right and bring that out, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So talk to me about follow-up. All right. So what is your strategy that you learned from your dad that you have applied in your life to follow up with your relationships in a way that has created a lot of opportunities?
Yeah. So I'll highlight two big things. One is that follow-up is the most important follow-ups are the ones when you don't need something. Because if you are consciously or unconsciously, if the way people experience you is that they only hear from you when you want something from them, then they don't feel like you genuinely value them in relationship. And so the magic really occurs primarily in cultivating that ability to stay in touch when you don't need something. And I was actually was interviewing someone else earlier today who is an author, and I've like noticed all of a sudden like 5 or 6 times in the last couple months he's like posted like that he's like hanging out socially with like really like $100 millionaire kind of entrepreneurs that have done all this stuff. And like it's not like I'm taking a picture with you at a conference, it's like, oh, like they're at your house, like that's cool. And so I asked him about that, and he's basically said the same thing of like, people that are of high quality, oftentimes people don't like, they almost avoid them because they just assume that they're out of their league. But if they do reach out to them, they're reaching out to them only when they need something. And so having this capability of staying in touch with people when you don't need something is really powerful, and we systematize that in what we do. And then the second thing that I would say is like, always, like, it doesn't, whether you like it or not, like everyone is always asking essentially, what have you done for me lately? And so like always in every interaction, even if the sort of pendulum is swung, or the teeter-totter is like, you've done everything for this person and like it's your time to call it in or whatever, the more you can just think about, even on some micro scale, like adding value to them in the form of asking about their kid by name, in the form of sharing with them something that they might find interesting, in the form of making them laugh, whatever. But like make that interaction something more than they're just experiencing you asking them for something, even if you feel like you have the right to in that interaction. The more you can do that, the better it goes.
Right. Okay. So this is two important things, right? Is, keeping in touch when you don't need anything. That's key, because that is the problem. In particular, network marketers have a real issue with this, right? I've seen this again and again and again and again, where like they'll reach out to someone they've never talked to in 10 years because they don't talk to anybody except for 2 people. And then the only reason they're reaching out is to pitch them on something. And then they'll reach out to them again 3 months later when they're pitching something else. So that was I think a key takeaway is you're systematizing keeping in touch with people when you don't need anything, which is valuable for maintaining relationships. And then people are always saying, "What's in it for me?" Right? Like, what was the last thing you did for me? Right? And that is a natural reciprocity function of humanity. Right? We're all like that. Even if we're not trying to be like that, we're still like that. And so constantly being a mode where you're giving value to people to where they remember you as someone who gave them value all the time So these are 2 keys that you found to building relationships, and you help. So you systematize these things. How do you systematize those things?
Yeah. So one of the key sort of functions in what in the way our software system works is what we call a rotation of remember. And so we've broken out the concepts of follow-up into different categories to help you to think about those things more strategically and also more clearly, right? So like there are times when I have reached out to someone and maybe I sent them some information and then now I need to follow up with them in 3 days or whatever my system says, and see if they watch the video and nudge the conversation along or whatever that is. So we call that a follow-up, right? That's sort of the traditional style. But then rotations we put them in a separate category for 2 reasons. One is we want you to think of them distinctly. And secondly, rotations are ongoing, right? And so a follow-up is like, I need to do this in 3 days and then I've checked it off my list, it's done. And maybe I set whatever the next follow-up is. Rotations are forever until I decide I don't want to, until I want to take somebody out of my orbit. And so whether it's monthly or quarterly or whatever, I put David on my list, I put Todd on my list, whomever, and I touch base with them approximately once a month, approximately once a quarter, with some variation in there. And that allows me just to have that little nudge to go, okay, cool. Like go see what Todd's up to. And so that thing will pop up and I'll go look on Todd's thing. And, inevitably he will be, like in some deep powder riding up in Bend, on a snowboard up in Bend, or he'll have just been to Mexico on a trip or whatever it is. And it's, it's just so easy to be like, hey dude, like just was thinking about you, saw the pictures from Mexico, looks awesome. How's Carla, his wife? Like, that's not hard, but it's those little moments. And what ends up happening so often for our clients and for me personally is like, I'll do that and I'll genuinely like, there's no agenda. Like I don't, I'm assuming it's going nowhere. I don't have anywhere in mind that it's necessarily going, other than that I genuinely appreciate this person and their high value in my life. And they'll go, oh my gosh, it's so awesome you reached out to me. Like this is going on and I need to plug you into it. And they just like, sometimes they'll even say like, I was about to call you. I guarantee you, like, even if they had intended to do so, 99% of the time they weren't going to call you. But because you were steadfast in showing up in their life, you have this knack for showing up in the right place at the right time in their life. And I've had our clients report that to me hundreds of times. I've had that personal experience so many times, and it's magical. Like it's the best feeling ever.
Yeah, so this is incredible. And so this does show, because for example, I, got Todd on and was interviewing Todd, and then, he introduced me to you, right? For a reason, obviously, because you're in touch with him all the time, right? If you were not in touch with him all the time, there's just no reason he would have done that. So that's an example of how that shows up, where if you keep in touch with people introduce you to people, they introduce you to situations. And then when they meet someone else that needs a resource, the person that pops into their mind is the person that they're most connected with. Yes. Right? So this value of the way that you keep connected with people is really powerful, right? So you systematize this. So rotating. So once again, we just want to repeat the phraseology. So rotations is just, this isn't a follow-up for any reason. This is just, I'm keeping in touch with this person. So you will put them in your system. You'll say, I'm going to put this person, I'm going to talk to this person once a week, or I'm going to talk to this person every 3 days, or I'm going to talk to them once a month, or I'm going to talk to them every 3 months. And then when they pop up in your system, you'll look them up on Facebook, see what's going on in their life, and then follow up with them. That's like a rotation, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then a follow-up is something different. A follow-up is like, hey, I just showed you a presentation, or hey, I want you to look at this for me, or hey, I would like your opinion on something. And then, I'm going to follow up with that person like, the next day or in 24 hours or whenever we schedule an appointment. So these things, rotations and follow-ups, you're distinguishing those things.
Correct. Okay,
interesting, right? So, like, just how many people right now do you have in some sort of like rotation in your system personally?
Something like 600. So, wow. I get, which, a lot, the majority of I kind of have a system of the way I think about this, right? So the majority of my people that are in a rotation I think 3,600 people in my phone. Right. So
you have 3,600
3,600
relationships in your contact.
Yeah.
base.
so, a sixth of my contacts are in some kind of a rotation. I actually would endeavor to have a higher hit rate there than I do now. I'm sort of working through that and always kind of balancing those two things, but most of those are quarterly, right? So, that gives me, let's say it was just that, right? So that means that four times a year, that's, so 2,400 a year. So it's like, 7 or 8 people a day that pop up for me. And most of those are a really simple nudge, right? So, if it's once a month or once a quarter, then I'll probably check Facebook and see what they've got going on. For ones that are more frequent than that, then I don't need to do that, right? It's just, hey, it's like I will oftentimes just be like, hey, I was thinking about you today, just want to see how things are going, what's going on in your world, and let people do that. And a lot of times people don't respond, and that's totally okay, right? They'll respond in the time when it's right for them. And yet, even so, I still kind of sent that little bit of signal towards that relationship. And I believe there's value in that, even when there is no response back in time.
Well, I mean, it just as a value, I mean, I think that you are the only person that I know that keeps in touch with somebody on some sort of a structured basis that's like in a specific way, other than blast an email out, which is a totally different thing, with 600 people, like even once a quarter. One person I ever met did that with me, only one, right, that I could remember, and that was Mark Yarnell, right? I still remember it because I met Mark Yarnell because I reached out to him because I read his book, and then I started to get well known and started to recruit a lot of people. And he's dead now. He passed away a few years back, but until he died, I got a phone call from him every 6 months, like to the day. Awesome. And I do not know how he kept track of that, but like every 6 months, my phone would ring. Like literally, I would talk to him today, and then it's April now, so in October, on October 18th, I would get a phone call from Mark Yarnell, right? And it was like, "Hey, David," enthusiastic every single time. He is the only person that has ever done that I've ever known. So
that's so crazy.
So interesting.
So one of my business partners, his name's Thomas, and he joined us a couple of years ago, and he worked with I just lost his name. The 1980s, like the Bond King guy, like the junk Bond King, like the guy that they made the movie Wall Street about. He ended up his company got acquired by the guy. I'll think of his name in a minute, Michael something, and he's like that. And he was like you would never think that this guy would, he's like this big, he's got a ton of money, and he's like this old school guy or whatever. But truly, he was like, I met him, and he was like, "You're gonna work for me, like in a year from now, you're gonna be working for me." And he was like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." And like same thing, literally a year later to the day, he was like, "All right, hey, it's me. Like, you're coming, right?" And he was like, "What the hell just happened?" And so I love that, this is part of what I think is neat, and I think what I'm grateful for with having my dad as my co-founder is that I think these are old school principles that like old school values really that have kind of like died out, and people I think just have kind of gotten lazy, right? Like Facebook gives us or whatever, social media of choice that you have gives us like this illusion of connectedness. And so we end up not doing these things, but really it's an illusion, right? Like we have an illusion of connectedness, but a reality of separation. And when we get into, a place where we're suffering or whatever, that's when we have that realization of like, yeah, cool. Like I see your pictures on Facebook, but that doesn't mean that we like have a real relationship. And suddenly I have this feeling of isolation. And so part of what I believe that we're doing is like modernizing some of these things, like, these old school, like index box things that people used to do and stuff that worked. And yet nobody's carrying around a shoebox full of index cards with these little separators to help them to remember, stay in touch with people periodically. Like people just don't do that stuff anymore, but this is what we've sort of modernized into a system that you can carry with you wherever you go, and you can search it and so on.
So like after every conversation, you take notes. Like, do you do it like right then? So like after this conversation, you're on this interview with me, you're going to go into your system and you're going to like take notes on like the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I'm not a robot, right? I'm a human being, and
Hmm.
I've got 3 kids that are in the other room right there, and so there's probably a 75% plus probability that number one of them's gonna like gate crash our call here in a little bit. So apologies in advance if that happens. But like, so my intention is to do that, and I would say I'm successful there 70% of the time. I work with a virtual assistant that helps me, and so I have some sort of like filter practices to help me catch things that I would otherwise drop. And one of them is that she every day looks at my calendar and is like, okay, cool. Like I see you were on with David and I don't see a note. Like, do you need a note for that conversation? And so she helps me to make sure that I don't drop things and that I capture them while they're still fresh enough that they don't just get lost.
Right. Okay. All right. So you take notes in the system, and then you set like while you're taking a note. Like, can you show me this in your system? Can you show me exactly how you do this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Do you have like can you hit the present button? Does it allow you to do that?
I see it.
Yeah. Click on it and see if you can share your screen and just like show me how you do this.
Yeah, cool.
I
Yeah,
think
it'll
this
let
is
me do it.
super valuable for everybody here because I know that probably nobody that watches this has such an intricate way of following up with people as you, because you kind of specialize in this, and most of them have a really horrible way of following up, which is they kind of do it when they feel like it, and that makes things get lost 100% of the time.
Yeah,
Except for with the people that you're always connected with. I think what most people do, Adrian, and what the difference is that you're really showing is what most people do is they keep in touch with the people that they really like only, like maybe 5 or 10 people. And then everybody else just, it's not real relationships. And they like a video and they think it's a relationship or something like this. I think that there's almost nobody that does what you're doing right now. So I could see you guys just over a period of 10 years, particularly being massive just from the way you network. Because, people will watch this video, they'll get in touch with you, you'll keep in touch with them 10 years down the road, that person will be a leader in network marketing and they'll refer to their whole team in just because you stay in touch. That's how people are.
yeah. I think that's exactly right, and it is. It's about the sort of long term values of that. That we're trying to help people to learn how to cultivate. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna plug. I gotta plug in my phone here so I can show you.
Yeah,
that,
sure.
right?
Sure.
That might be a little cooler way to be able to demonstrate it to you. But yeah, there's such magic in it, and it comes again, just like an example that came from today, right? Is that I did this podcast with this author, and literally right after the podcast, we had originally interacted on Twitter, and so I went on to Twitter to like send him a DM to just tell him how much I had enjoyed the conversation, and that I appreciated him, and so I was doing that, and he ended up posting this that he's been experimenting with Amazon ads for his book, and that he's having a really difficult time with like his conversion rates have suddenly plummeted, and he's like, I like can't figure out what's going on. I need a resource here. And I was able to like immediately go into my database and go, oh wow, I forgot I have a buddy who like has done a bunch of that stuff. He owns a press, a publishing company that specializes in working with companies on Amazon, and he could help this guy. And so like I ended up hooking these people up, and it's like I have nothing at all to gain there, other than that I think that I like have definitely leveled up like this author's appreciation of us and what we do,
Sure.
and that's the whole thing, right? Like that's what I want to make happen. um There we go. Okay. I got my screen up here. So let me get it over here and I'll share it with you. So yeah, that's, there's just a lot of satisfaction, if nothing else, that comes from being able to do that. And that's something that I really appreciate. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you what this looks like.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to see it.
And we'll just like we can use you as an example, right? And so
Yeah,
you and I, we literally met a week ago as a result of you being on with Todd, and that's where it all came from. And so I'm gonna go to window, movie recording.
Oh, I didn't even know how you're doing that. Add to stream. Here we go.
There we go.
All right. So
All right, cool.
Yeah, I have no idea how you just did this. So in any case, so this is your content. This is the contact mapping software that you have. Okay. So
Right.
this is the app, and it's just like they could download contact mapping from the App Store. So
exactly.
Yeah,
and so this is my dashboard. So there's a whole bunch of people on here because I went to a networking meeting earlier today. I had a spreadsheet of all the people who I met on there, and I gave that to my virtual assistant, and she took those 19 people who I met and put them into contact mapping for me. And so now what I need to do next is to reach out to those people and connect with them on LinkedIn. So I've got a bunch of follow-ups that she set for me today. And then I've got you, right? So I had set a follow-up reminder for our conversation tonight. For our Facebook Live. And so there you are. And then you can see I've got some rotations here for me to go through, right? And so I can pop one of those things up when they show up, and I can, pop up this guy, Brian. And if he and I interacted, which incidentally we did today, it's funny that he popped up today because he was the one who invited me to this networking group. I could put a note in there about what we talked about. Or if it was just a single, just a little light touch, I can just hit this little button that says touch, and it goes, okay, cool. That's everything for today. You do it with him once a month. So your next one will be on May 18th, and I'm on to the next thing. And so, we'll use you as an example, right? I go in here, and this does happen to me, right? I go, David, who's David Wood, right? And so I can drill in there and, oh, your birthday's coming up in almost exactly a month. So I'll wish you a happy birthday in a month. And I've got your,
how'd you get my birthday from Facebook?
From Facebook, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're like, I got to take that down.
No, it's fine. I just you have my birthday in your contact manager. You know what I mean? I was like, I didn't give you my birthday.
You'll be hearing from me
right there. You know what I
mean? And then there's the social security number section. No, just kidding.
Yeah. But you have my credit cards too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So so I can go, and so then I can go in here, right? And I can go into my notes, and so we originally. I just added you when I created you as a contact in my contact mapping was on the 12th, a week ago, as a result of the conversation you had with Todd. And then you and I ended up jumping on a call on the 13th and getting to know each other better and the whole thing. Right. And so I've got my history of all these touches. And as we go further down the list, I've got all those things here, and then I can see my follow-up, and I can, once we sort of complete the follow-up today, I'll put you on a rotation instead. And, then it's just going to be us staying in touch. And so all of this stuff it just happens naturally, right? And so, I can do it here, right? So here's the follow-up. And if I was, if we weren't here on Facebook Live, I could, call or text you or whatever, but I'm going to say, okay, cool. I'm going to mark it done. And when I do that, it's like, okay, cool. What's the next note, right? So I'm demoing the app on Facebook Live, and we're having a conversation about some really powerful connection principles that David and I share in different ways.
Now you just typed that by talking.
Yep. And so one of the things that I most appreciated that he had to share was the importance of not just having a lot of connections, but having depth of connections in order to develop more powerful conversations. And so I'm doing this through, this is the inbuilt dictation capability within my iPhone, right? It's nothing there's no proprietary tech here, but this is what I do, right? I walk out of the meeting and I brain dump what I want to remember in 30 seconds of that conversation. And I am able to move on to the next thing. And then, so it's like, okay, cool. When are you going to follow up with David? And so everything just goes in this flow, and it gives me this capability to do that. And then suddenly I go into, okay, who do I know who is a realtor, right? So the other day, as an example, I came across this meme that was really cute that a home inspector found an Easter egg on the pipe manifest outside of the house he was inspecting, and he added it to the inspection report and made this really cute little note about that the chocolate was going to melt or something, and it was sweet. And I was like, oh, that's a cool, that'll give them a laugh. I'm going to send this to my friends who are realtors. And so I tag people based on different areas. And so I grabbed my realtors, and I just was able to cycle through them and send them a note and reach out to them and say, hey, this is what's up. Right. And so, and this is a perfect example, this guy, I sent it to him, and I hadn't talked to this guy in a long time. And so I sent it to him, and instantly he responds back to me hey, what's going on? Adrian, right? He probably had changed phones or who knows? And so we end up having this conversation, and he like invited me to a housewarming party, and I can't make it to the party, but like all this stuff, right? There was like literally no agenda at all, but we like had, oh, sorry, I tilted my phone.
Well,
Anyways,
I mean, nobody does this. That's why he invites you to plays, because who does that? You know what I mean? Like, who reaches out to people for no reason? Like every three is like once a year I hear from Adrian. Like, what the heck? You know, like, 20 years of this, man, and you'll be one of the most connected people on the face of the earth, dude. Seriously.
I hope so. That's a fun goal. So those are the things that happen. And it's like, I want it to be organic, right? Like that, like Jimmy, we had been in touch for a while, and then this was before we had the rotation stuff. And so I kind of fallen out of contact with him. And I was like, all right, well, this is my opportunity to re-engage. And, I didn't know what was going to happen. And now he's back on a rotation, and we're going to, cool things are going to happen as a result.
It's awesome, dude. Yeah. So that's basically your system then. So your basic system is that you can schedule a follow-up, and you can schedule a rotation and take notes.
Yep. And then everything in there, I showed you kind of a structured search scenario, but like one of the things that I think is really big is like, I talk about, it's like you can Google your own memory, right? And where this is going is I think what's going to happen is that you're going to be able to like AI interact with your own memory, where it's like, this is a private database of your experiences that I can mine. And so it's like, hey, I met David today. This is what he's up to. This is what he's after. This is whatever, here's a few things about him. And my AI could come back to me and be like, hey, based on the people, this does not exist yet, to be clear. But like, I think the tech has like made it like, this is now possible. Like, hey, David should meet so-and-so because of this thing or whatever. Like, do you want to make that introduction or whatever that is? Or, today we can't do that part yet, but what we can do today is like, somebody goes, hey, who do you know who can help me with Amazon ads? I type Amazon, and like, I'm not thinking about a structured tag based on Amazon because that's not really my business. But my friend Reagan is an expert in that, and I connected him with Nick, and they're going to support each other, and good things are going to happen as a result. So I can mine my database for literally anything based on whatever. I bump into somebody and I go, I can't remember who that guy is, but for some reason I remember that he lived in Costa Rica. And so I search Costa Rica, and up you pop, or whatever little thing it is. And so I leverage that all the time when I bump into somebody and I'm like, what's your name? But I can remember some little thing about you, and I can find you on that basis.
Right. Okay. All right. So you use this to remember things, to jog your memory about people, to connect people to other resources, and then maintain relationships like it's like you remember them, but you really don't have to.
Right. And I think
like, wow, this guy remembers to talk to me. You know what I mean? I just met him once, and then they follow up with you again. You follow up with them again and again and again, and then you're just more connected than everybody around you.
Exactly. And I think not that you necessarily said this, although, or that you intended this, although maybe you did, but like one of the things that I think sometimes I'll hear like, oh, like, isn't that like weird, or isn't that creepy, or isn't that like, doesn't that diminish somehow the value of doing this if you're using this tool to help you to do it? And I don't think anything could be further from the truth, right? Like, I think the fact that Todd cares enough about people to write these things down in his notebook that he's done for 30 years, and he like keeps all these things with him and all the things that he does, like that's one of the most beautiful things about Todd. It doesn't diminish at all the value of the fact that he reaches out to me, because I wouldn't have heard, like, who cares? And so that's really the way I think about it, is like, yes, like there is, you could use these powers for evil and like only be after what you have. But I think as long as you operate from a place of positive intention, that using tools to help you be better at anything is just a good idea. It's like,
I don't think anybody cares that you're taking notes, because they're not doing that. I mean,
right.
Like, I don't think that anybody's going to be like, wait, what do you mean you're taking notes on our conversations, and that's the only reason you're talking to me? I mean, like, somebody would have to just kind of like, there's nothing wrong with it if they think that. I mean, I just like, yeah, of course I'm taking notes. This is my life. This is what I do. I help people build relationships. I just don't think it's an issue. What I think is interesting is, I have an experience, because I just something that reminded me of this. So, I trained my memory before, right? And it's still trained. I just don't practice as much as I used to, because I'm focused on other things right now. but like at one point I could memorize like, 600 numbers, and things like this, like, and it's like, no, I don't have a photographic memory. That was very hard to learn how to do. And then I started remembering everybody's names everywhere I go, which right now, again, I'm more lazy than I was with this. And then I would run into people like just in random spots that I only met once, like a month before. And I'd be like, "Hey, Susan," you know what I mean? And she'd be like people are mind blown when you take the time to remember details about somebody. They're mind blown by it, regardless of whether it's your memory or you actually took the time to care about them enough to write it down. That's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you can have a profound impact on people. Do you know who Harvey Mackay is?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know Harvey Mackay, but
yeah. But yeah, he's sort of this like OG guy of networking. He wrote, did you well before you're thirsty and swim with the sharks without being eaten alive. And he's a pretty close personal friend and mentor of Eric Worre. And Eric had him speak at his.
I know Eric personally. I know Eric.
Yeah, Eric's brilliant.
House and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So Eric put Harvey on stage a few years ago, and Harvey is famous for this thing that he had in his company called the Mackay 66, which was this, like, there were 66 questions that he required his sales reps to be able to answer and identify about all of their customers. That was like political affiliations and what's their favorite meal and all these attributes. But he was like, he had really made his name for doing it himself and then building a sales force of people who really knew about their client and knew them really well. And so from the stage, Harvey had essentially like done background. Eric had probably helped him and given him the name and connected him to some people, but he like had done background research on the story of somebody who was one of the super VIPs sitting in the front row. And so Harvey is like doing this thing and he's telling the story and he's sort of illustrating this point. And he goes, and I want to tell you about someone who's here today. And he begins to recount the story and like with some personal details that are meaningful about this person who's sitting in the front row. And they pan to this gentleman. And by the time Harvey has finished just telling his story and telling about his love for his wife and telling about some things that he overcame in his life, none of which was like super private, but like was things that not everyone knew about him. Certainly the guy was literally like weeping, experiencing someone see and know of him in that way. And I believe that we have the power to have that kind of profound effect on people, because how often do we just go through life feeling kind of invisible or kind of unseen or uncared for? And when someone stops and sees you, just that experience in itself can be transformative to your life. And so I love helping others to be able to create that experience and that impact in the lives of the people around them.
Yeah, and I think that as well, there's multiple sides to this. Like, building relationships with people just makes you feel so much better about yourself.
Yeah.
Right. It really does. Like I think that if anybody is ever like in a slump, a lot of the times they're in a slump emotionally is because they're disconnected from people and they don't even really realize what they're doing. And so just this effort of like, I like your approach that you said earlier, where you were like, I was bored. So I was like, oh, I'm going to book lunch with people 5 days a week. I mean, you have to have gotten that from your dad. You ever read that book, Never Eat Alone by Keith? I think it's Keith Ferrazzi.
Yeah, great book. Yeah,
it's a fantastic book. That book is like the book of like your stuff. You know what I mean? It's like if you guys want to read ladies and gents watching this, if you want to read a great book, it's Keith Ferrazzi, right?
Ferrazzi, yep.
That was like the handbook of Jonathan Cronstead. He was if you don't know him, he's a great guy to know. He was the CEO to my company for a long time, and he was cool. This is how he was. He was always building new relationships with new people every single day, like constantly. And so, this will take you out of emotional slumps. It will build rapport. And what I think is the real difference here. This is why I talked to you and I was like, oh, I want to at least share this with people because I think it's a useful resource. But I think a lot of times people are wondering, like a lot of people I know, they're in network marketing, right? Or home business and things like this. And they always wonder, like, how does that person join a business? And then, it's like everyone they talk to gets in and they rise to the top of a company, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do they do that? And really, it's because they have relationships like this.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah.
It's because so many people are connected to them that when it's time to do something, they have so many people that will follow them in because people like them so much that they can just, boom, get to the top of any corporation, any opportunity. If they lose one job, they got 5 more. You know what I mean? And so the key to opportunity is relationships. That's what I think.
I totally agree. And, there's Eric Worre said this in he'll in a lot of the things he does, he'll do like an hour sort of like opening set of thoughts to whatever event he's hosting. And I don't remember which one this was, but it was a couple years ago. And he had this quote that just like was so spot on. He said, when you first get into network marketing, and I think this is true in any business, but especially network marketing, the good news and the bad news is that you will be rewarded or punished for the life you have lived up until that point. Right. So if you've just been like a total like deadbeat and then you like get into network marketing, like doesn't mean you can't make it, but like you're going to have tough sledding for a while because everyone's like, you want me to do what? Like, no, I'm not doing that. Whereas the example you just gave, right? Like these people that can rise to the top, well, it's because they have been maintaining and cultivating valuable relationships and demonstrating their trustworthiness and so on for a long time, so that when it comes time, people are like, yeah, if you're going, I'm going.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. So, again, everybody here who's watching, we've been on for an hour. We could stay on here and talk for quite a long time. And I know you've got 3 kids to attend to and everything. And so everybody that's watching this, if you're interested in contact mapping, they have a free version of the app you can download. And I think they have an upgrade for $30 a month or something like that. It's just, I think, contact mapping in the App Store. You can get on your phone. And then, if people want to touch bases with you or connect with you, what's the best way to do that? Just Facebook?
Yeah, Facebook. I'm really easy to find there. Adrian at contactmapping.com is my email, so that's I'm easy to find there too. But I love connecting with people. I'm easy. Fortunately, Adrian Chenault, there's not too many of us out there, so I'm easy to find on whatever platform.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, thank you for attending, everybody. I'll be back here this week. We've got some great people coming out, and I'm going to keep doing this for a while. Tomorrow, actually, I got my buddy Eric Allen, who is just one of the. He was actually my very first upline when I got on the internet, and not a lot of my contacts know this guy. He's fantastic. So
Cool,
thanks for
man.
coming out. Thanks for watching. Please, if you got value from this, feel free to share it with people that you know that could benefit from the relationship building knowledge, right? Because this can really help people with a lot of knowledge. And reach out to Adrian. He's given you his email, Adrian at contactmapping.com, I believe, and also on Facebook. Adrian Chenault. Maybe you could leave a comment so people could have, your Facebook to click on, right? In there. And thank you, Shanika, for sharing. Appreciate that. And come back for more. We'll keep sharing with you skills, ideas, strategies, concepts, softwares that we run into that are going to help you along your journey to becoming a better you, making more money, creating better relationships. And today, I think this is one of the things we all need work on, right? Look, we all have dropped the ball with relationships, all of us, right? Except for Adrian. He's the only one.
Including me. We're all humans.
He's never dropped the ball, not a single time. Except for him, he is the only one who has never dropped the ball. So reach out to him. You got his name right there on the screen. Thank you for attending, and we will be on here tomorrow. And Adrian, I very much enjoyed this conversation, so thanks for coming out, brother.
Me too, David. Thanks, man.